So what if you take every single unit in the Space Marine army, give it an inbuilt Invuln save, and a mini version of transhuman physiology? With the new Templar Codex, that has become a reality. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where today I just wanted to talk a little bit more in depth as to one of the builds that you can make from the new Black Templar Codex, a fairly different way to build a Space Marine army, and potentially one that could make quite a lot of units within the Codex just that little bit more interesting. There's certainly quite a lot of units that get some good mileage out of a 5+ Invuln save, never mind the other benefits that the Black Templars have to offer. In this video I thought we'd just talk about the vow itself and how you get the rules, what sort of units could be really rewarded with this build, and maybe just an idea for an example army list that tries to make the most out of these more durable vehicles and troops. So in the new Black Templar Codex, you get the standard chapter tactics of a 5+ save against mortal wounds, and you get to reroll advances and charges. In place of having a super doctrine though, one that makes their assault doctrine more dangerous, you get to pick one out of 4 different vows at the start of the game, getting some powerful whole game buffs to the army at the expense of a downside, also known as a passion. One of them's an anti-psyker one for a burst of movement turn 1, 2 of them are decent combat buffs at the expense of being less flexible in melee in 2 ways, but the one that I found the most interesting was the Uphold the Honour of the Emeperor one, which basically gives out a 5+ Invuln save to every single unit in the Space Marine Codex, provided the army is entirely Black Templars. I think that's the most important part of the rule, but you also have another side advantage that you can never be wounded on a 2 or 1, kind of a mini transhuman physiology, though it doesn't come up really all that often, usually unless you're toughness 4 marines being shot by strength 8 weaponry, or being attacked by someone like Blood Angels who has an innate +1 to wound. The Invuln save is the good bit in my opinion. The passion or the downside for this vow is that you can't get cover at any point, either dense or light. Now as trade-offs go, this can be a potentially powerful one. In particular, if you're trying to build a vehicle list around this 5+ Invuln save, then dense cover can be really quite an easy one to get the advantage of, and for some vehicles that might well outweigh the durability buff that you get from the 5+ Invuln sometimes. I'd say just in general this vow does make it a little bit less valuable for infantry, as they can be able to get light cover really quite easily, and of course the vow could kind of actively disadvantage anything with a 2+ save or storm shields, who aren't going to benefit from the 5+ Invuln and can get up to some very nice saves if they do get light cover for a turn. It makes it kind of an interesting proposition, because things with a 2+ save and 4+ Invulns, things like Blade Guard veterans, Vanguard veterans or Assault Terminators, are some of Black Templar's best units to build around. Overall though, having a 5+ Invuln save on every Space Marine unit for free is no small thing, as it basically gives you a very nice defensive buff on a lot of units that just aren't really costed for it. I'd say perhaps the biggest advantage are for vehicles with a 3+ armor save, as typically they wouldn't be getting light cover anyway, so the downside of the vow just doesn't really apply that much. With vehicles in particular, the only weapons that tend to be all that efficient against them tend to be high strength and high AP ones, lots of which will have AP -3 or even more. Just in the current meta, things like Admech Cognis las cannons, or Space Marine Redemptor Dreadnoughts themselves with their AP -4. This gives a lot of vehicles a nice defensive boost that they need against the very weapons that want to target them the most. I think perhaps as a secondary consideration, it's also very nice on toughness 4 3+ save infantry, things like standard intercessors or crusader squads. They'll still get some decent value out of their invul, and also might actually trigger the only ever wounded on 3+ mechanic. It's still fairly efficient to fire heavy weapons at standard Space Marines, they are quite valuable, and that could genuinely make them a lot more sturdy when that happens. I would bear in mind as well that the vow is flexible. You could still build around this vow, and then if you face an opponent that doesn't have any high AP weapons at all, you could maybe swap it out for one of the combat ones, if it made more sense for the list that you were playing. It's pretty nice to have such a powerful defensive boost available, but then even be able to switch out of it and play a slightly different game. Say if your opponent's army just has tons and tons of AP -2, maybe a whole bunch of Orc Boggies with rocket launchers and those Squig Boggies. So here's just a few ideas for units out of the Space Marine decks that might benefit from a free Invuln save, and probably won't mind the Black Templar 5+ to ignore mortal wounds either. Pretty much as always when we talk Space Marine vehicles, the Redemptor Dreadnought is certainly worth a shout. It's pretty competitive in just about any form that you take it, and already does seem to be particularly popular in lists that give it a 5+ Invuln save, such as Deathwatch with their Relic Storm Shield. It's quite nice that in these Black Templar lists they wouldn't even necessarily have to cluster up next to a relic to get that durability buff. They could go off hunting on their own if they wanted. and it just seems pretty powerful to me to have a Dreadnought that's so much more sturdy against high AP weapons such as Drukhari Lances, as well as having a powerful 5+ shrug off against mortal wounds if your opponent tries to kill them in that way. Redemptors could even get some good use out of re-rolling charges if they do want to mix it up in melee as well. I think in Black Templar lists, if you are thinking about taking this vow, a Redemptor Dreadnought or 3 is hardly going to be a bad choice. Maybe it's a little bit unfortunate that it does feel like the Redemptor Dreadnought isn't the one that most needed the buff. Besides those though, or if you are looking for more vehicles to make use of the 5+ Invul after you already have 3 Redemptors, I think that quite a lot of the other options become more interesting as well. I think the Impulsor in particular could be an interesting choice. Usually when people take it, they wind up shelling out 15 points for the shield dome, but if you take it with this vow, you basically already get the shield dome baked in for free. You could be running repulsors really quite cheaply, and potentially consider other options for the top hatch, such as perhaps that Iron Hail Sky Talon array, which I think is really quite efficient for the points, just 10 points for basically a squad's worth of anti-infantry firepower. You could also think about the Gladiator tanks as well. The Gladiator Valiant and Reaper are both fairly efficient gun platforms in their own right, and being toughness 8 usually means that only the most efficient anti-tank weapons will gun them down. You could even think about adding on the Black Templars add-on multi-melter for 20 points if you really wanted to. Much like in Ravenwing, attack bikes will get great value out of the 5+ Invul. They certainly hit hard enough for the points, and any boost to their durability is quite nice as an added advantage, and the same holds true for ATVs or land speeders. I think that Venerable Dreadnoughts could be worth a look as well. Twin Las Cannon Missile Launcher can already be somewhat popular for anti-tank duties, though they're quite often passed up for the relic Contemptor with the Twin Volkites and the Invul save, for more or less the same points cost. If you did want to get a bit more dedicated long-range anti-tank though, with the addition of the Invul, they make them far harder to shift, and far more worth it to spend the extra investment. I think that those might be some of the best picks of the Space Marine motor pool right now, though to be honest basically any other vehicle will still like it. Rhinos and Razorbacks become far more durable, as you want with a transport, and it could be nice for things if you want to run things like Predators, Repulsors or Repulsor Executioners. For infantry, losing light cover is a little bit more of a trade-off, but I think there are still some squads that could find it interesting. The Toughness 4 ones can make use of not being wounded on 2s. Vanguard Veterans and the Troops choices might well like that, particularly any of the non-Primaris Marines who can't access transhuman physiology. I'm not sure if getting a 5+ Invul might be enough to encourage some people not to take Storm Shields on their Vanguard Veterans. You could have Marines with a 3+ save and a 5+ Invul instead of the 2+, 4+ for the extra 5 points. I guess you could potentially think about mixing in a few Lightning Claw and Chainsword Vanguard Vets as opposed to having max Storm Shields and Lightning Claws. Finally, it could still be nice on things like Inceptors or Eradicators, big tough Gravis Armor Marines that in general you are usually going to want to use anti-tank weapons to take down. Finally, and one that I've forgotten to include on this list for some reason, were the Servitors. Interestingly enough, there doesn't seem to be any rule in the Templar Vows thing that discourages them from getting the Invul save or the transhuman ability, and seeing as Servitors are basically junk little units that you only really take to be bodies on the field, having them get significantly more tougher is only a good thing, as they can just sit around and do the actions and maybe even hold down objectives out of line of sight. I think compared with most anywhere else, they'll have even better value in a Black Templar list running this vow. It's pretty handy to have the chaff units just be extra durable and annoying to remove. I feel like Servitors often can be the sort of unit if just one model survives, it might be the difference in victory points if they're trying to do something key. So if we put it all together though, I think that the list building challenge is kind of interesting for the Black Templars if they do want to make the most out of this 5+ Invul. Black Templars really are quite heavily geared towards melee, lots of nice buffs and options that really amp up their combat units, so I think in most Black Templar lists, even when they're running this vow, they will be wanting to capitalise on that as well. Here is just a very rough draft for a list, and by no means saying it's optimal, but just as a rough idea of what sort of units that you could pack in at a 2000 point level. I've put Helbrecht and Grimaldus leading this just as an example, though in hindsight I think it would certainly be better to swap one of those out for a non-unique character who can take your choice of relics and warlord traits. Basically other than that though, there's a Dreadnought gunline, 2 Redemptors with the Macroplasmas and 2 Venerable Dreadnoughts, some Incursors to start up the board and hold down midfield objectives, some Intercessors that can hold home field ones or push up if needed, and a couple of attack bikes moving around using good firepower and also being able to try and contest and score things with their good movement if they need. I think just having a couple of Redemptors, 2 Venerable Dreadnoughts and 2 attack bikes all with the 5+ saves should make them a little bit harder for the enemy anti-tank to deal with them. Then that's backed up with 3 hefty assault squads, 2 units of Vanguard veterans largely with jump packs, storm shields and lightning claws, and then 1 big unit of 7 assault terminators with thunderhammer and storm shield to slog down the middle. I've made a few uses of the Black Templar relic bearers options for those. The terminators and one of the Vanguard units should be very hard to shift with the extra durability relics, and the other unit of Vanguard veterans just hits very hard with that relic power fist. Finally, there's a unit of 4 servitors, just to do some actions or objectives if needed. Again, this definitely isn't optimal or particularly thought through, but perhaps just something along the sort of lines that you could do with Black Templars if you wanted to. In game, you could look at your opponent's army, think whether or not those 5+ Invulns are actually going to matter or not, and decide whether or not to swap to a more combat-focused vow if that made more sense. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think that this 5+ Invuln save vow will be seeing much play on the table? Or is it likely to get outcompeted by the current strong marine list right now? Or just going all in for the melee units from the Knights of Sigismund? Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep these regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the content on the channel, I'd just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways, with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.